Minasan konnichiwa. Watashi no namae wa Roberto Mairusu desu. I'm not doing the whole thing, Japanese. Hello everyone, my name's Rob Miles. I have been doing AI safety communication on the internet since 2014, which is 10 years ago. Oh my God, okay. And professionally since about 2017. I run a YouTube channel, Rob Miles AI Safety. I also recently have been working on aisafety.info, which is aiming to be a comprehensive FAQ about AI safety, which I encourage everyone to use. I think it's growing into a really great resource. I'm going to talk just for a moment about that. Oh, no, I'm not. These are the old slides. All right, then, I'm not going to talk about that, other than to say that it's kind of wiki-like. Each of the pages on aisafety.info, if you click the little edit icon, takes you to a Google Doc, which that was an enormous amount of work to get that working with Google's backend. Not by me, but we have an excellent team of developers. But I encourage you to submit new questions, to suggest edits to the existing questions, and to just use it as a resource. It's great for when you're trying to explain things to people. Okay, so a little bit of audience participation, please. Who here is a researcher? Hands up. Right, almost everyone, great. Who hopes with their research to cause the creation of artificial general intelligence to go well for humanity? For whom is that like an important motivation? A lot of people, okay. Who thinks that AGI is going to happen in their lifetime? Almost everyone? Yeah? Like probably? Okay, and who here plans to build AGI personally themselves? Okay, consider not doing that. The majority of you do not have such delusions of grandeur. But that's interesting. For almost everyone in this room, you want to help AGI go well, and yet you do not plan to build it yourself. How is that supposed to work causally, right? What's the mechanism by which you having ideas results in AGI going well? At some point, people need to see your work, they need to read it, they need to understand it. That's how they will implement it. In other words, communication is the only way that your work can possibly matter. Research communication is not an afterthought. It's the point. So I'm here to talk about the impact of research communication. And I hate when people do this. I think that these things are usually so dumb. But I think this one is actually true. Perhaps if you replace this, my new slides, this is a proportional rather than an equals. But the impact that your work has is approximately proportional to how good your ideas are, the quality of your research, multiplied by how well you communicate it, how well you cause other people to understand it, and how well they end up understanding it. And this has the expected thing that if either of these is 0, then the result is 0. And also, the effect of doubling either of these is the same. Now, if you think about how much work it would be for you to double the quality of your research, I don't know how easy that is to do. That sounds very hard. Could you double the quality of your communication? Probably, right? On the margin, researchers tend to massively overinvest in the research relative to the communication. People tend to underinvest in communication. So, how can you do communication better? Well, first off, okay, the first thing, people need to see your work. This is kind of a problem because people are lazy, they are distracted, they are busy. Don't write for the audience as it should be, because they don't exist. Write for the audience as they are. And the audience as they are lazy, distracted, and busy. So make it convenient to find your work. Make your work come to people. And one way to do this is to put your work out there in a lot of different formats. Different people prefer to consume things in different formats, and it just makes it easier. So by all means, write a paper. But like, do a blog post as well, because the blog post is not subject to the word constraints that the paper is, the formality constraints of the paper. You have a lot more control over it, and you can just actually write better than you're able to in a paper. Similarly, not everybody wants to sink the amount of time necessary to read a full blog post, in which case, have a tweet thread, have a summary. Having a large number of people understand the basic idea of what your work is and why it's relevant is very valuable, because the number of people who need that level of understanding is much higher, right? You have these kind of ranks of how many people need to have what level of understanding of your work, and you want to make it really, really easy for as many people as possible to understand what you're working on. And that's going to make it easier for the people who need to find your work to find it. Similarly, do podcasts if that's an option. Make videos of like going through your stuff. Put as much as you can out on GitHub. Just generally try and get your stuff out there as much as possible in as many different ways as possible. So you've got your work in front of people. Now people need to actually read it. You need to get people's attention and keep it. This is difficult because people are distracted. Some of you even now are on your phones. This is actually fine. It's not a moral judgment. People are constantly making their own decisions about how to allocate their time and their attention. And this is fine. But if you want people to read your work, you need to get their attention and keep it. This starts with a title. A good title is answering the question that people most often have when they're reading a title, which is, should I read this? Or more accurately, do I want to read this? And the job of the title is to provide the information necessary for the person to answer that question very quickly and easily. This doesn't mean that the answer should always be yes. Some people are not going to want to read your thing, and that's fine. Don't lie to people to get them through the door if they're not going to benefit from reading your thing. But if your thing will provide value to people, then you need to demonstrate that value as quickly as possible to allow them to decide to read your thing. One way to think about titles is this sort of thought experiment, which I would like everybody to do right now. So the way this works is, you think about something that you're writing, something that you're perhaps close to completing, which maybe you've titled, maybe you want to retitle. And you imagine that you're here at this conference, and you bump into the perfect person to read this, your ideal audience. It's kind of like if you were planning who you would definitely want to read this, you see them here. But they're on their way to something else. They have an appointment, whatever. So you say, hey, oh wow, Professor whoever, it's excellent to see you. I'm writing this thing. I'm very excited about it. I think you should read it. And then you say something, right? You say some sentence there. That's your title, right? That core sentiment. I think you should read this thing. I've discovered that attention is all you need, right? Whatever it is. It's like probably your key, your most interesting or exciting finding, summarized in a way that is honest but attention-grabbing. People get weirdly hung up in sort of the norms and conventions of title writing, or they just try and copy other titles that were good, even when it's not relevant, because that's not the key finding of their work. So this is a practice that I find very useful. Then once people are in the door, they're busy. So get to the point. Don't waste time. You know what? I'm skipping this slide. So once you're actually in there, people have this question. It's a very similar question to the question that they had when they were reading the title, which is, do I want to keep reading this? So the job of the title is to get people to start reading. The job of the first sentence is to get people to read the second sentence, right? And the job of the first two sentences, perhaps, is to get people to read the intro, which the job of that is to get people to read more of the post. So you have to give people a reason to care. You have to explain to people why what you're saying is actually valuable, why they might want to decide to spend some of their limited time consuming your thing. So, for example, if you think about my intro, and also these rules don't quite apply to talks because people walking out of talks is a little bit, I kind of have you as a captive audience. I don't need to work quite so hard as you do in a post or a paper. But I started by explaining why the thing I'm explaining to you is extremely important. And if possible, you should do something like that, right? Motivate everything. But yes, people may not actually read the whole thing. Your job is not to get people to read the whole thing. Your job is to get people to have the information they need to make a decision of how much of your thing they should read. Here's one way that you can do this. This is how regular JPEG works, right? As the image loads in, you get more and more of it. If you write like this, you're going to have a problem because people start reading. They get, a quarter of the way through, and they say, oh, well, okay, I think I get that this is about some kind of blue checkery fabric. I'm not very interested in that, so I'll read something else. You failed to demonstrate that this is actually about this cat's very cute expression. It's better to write like progressive JPEG, where the first few bits go into a low-resolution version of your thing, and then the details get filled in with time. The benefit of this is twofold. Firstly, a quarter of the way through, people get what the idea is, right? They understand that this is about a cat, and you've told them in the title that this cat looks very cute, and if they care enough about that, then they are invested to actually put the time in and get that detail out. But also, if they're not that into cats, they know that, and they can find out early enough that they are maybe not interested in reading all the way through. That's fine too. You're collaborating with your audience to use their time effectively. And if someone leaves this after just the same amount of time as the previous one, they actually understand what your thing is about, and they could explain it to somebody else in a few sentences. And if they have a friend who's very into cats and will want to consume anything that involves them, they can now recommend it to them. And so your stuff actually gets in front of more people that way as well. But it's nice. I say it's like fine if people don't read your whole thing. It's nice if people read the whole thing. The way that you get people to consume the whole thing, make it engaging. Specifically, tell a story. Tell a story. You know humans? Humans, we all are, we're all humans. Humans love a story. They love a good story. And, stories hold people's attention and they stick in people's memory. And you may be saying like, well, I'm writing a piece of technical work. I'm not writing a story. No. You are always telling a story. You're always telling a story in your work. If you think that you're not telling a story, you are telling a boring story. Don't tell a boring story. Okay, so most technical writing is kind of like this. You just got like the thing, and then the other thing, and then the other thing, and finally the last thing. I'm like already asleep. This sucks. What you want is something like this, right? A thing, and that thing is important. It's a problem, whatever. So, this thing in response to that. But this thing in opposition to that. So, this last thing, right? You've linked things together. Basically, and this is actually advice that was that comes from TV writing, TV plot writing. You want to be connecting your story beats with a so or a but, never an and then. Because if something is a so, it's causally connected to the previous thing. It's a logical implication, it's a response, it's directly linked, it follows on, it flows. Or if it's a but, it's a surprise, and that has some, it's an upset, right? It has some emotional resonance, some impact, and that's memorable as well. So, okay, this is good for TV writing. How do you actually apply that to technical writing? Well, one thing that I like to do is something called invention fiction, or perhaps discovery fiction. If you're explaining a technical artifact, you can tell the story of how that technical artifact was invented. If you're explaining a discovery, something you've learned about the world, you tell the story of how you came to discover it. So like, here's an example I'm just going to talk through, a very basic. This is, again, how people usually do this kind of thing, right? They say, my system has 3 components. They are called A, B, and C. A is connected to B by X, and we'll let Y be the thing that connects A and C. We also connect B to C with Z. This is my system, right? Again, boring. Here's another way to do it. Start with, here's a problem. Again, an important problem. So we try A. A is the obvious thing you would try when you think of this problem, right? But it doesn't work. This is a naive solution. It fails in a number of cases. Here's why. So we introduce B. B helps correct for the shortcomings of A's naivety. And the way that that works is we connect them up like this with X. But the AB system also has a problem, right? There's some other shortcoming with it that you wouldn't have thought of. So in my new one, I have this be D. Imagine that that's a D. So we try D, and we connect it up, whatever. But the problem is that D actually interferes with B. So this doesn't work at all. So instead of D, we're going to use C. And if we connect up C in this way to A, which is Y, then we can connect it up with Z. And the clever thing about Z is it gets around this problem that D had where C interfered with B. So now we have an entire system. And this all works. And it solves all of the problems. It gets around the issues. And this is great. That was, I hope you will agree, a much more engaging way to build up this concept in people's minds. I feel as though I brought a fair number of people with me on that, despite the fact that this is completely contentless. There's nothing here. And yet, it's a story. It's a contentless story, but it still holds people's attention way better. So the advantages of this are manifold. Firstly, it's more interesting. Secondly, you actually end up with a better understanding, because you don't just know what the parts are, you know why every part is there, and you know why it wasn't something else that it could have been, and what would happen if it was absent. You have much more complicated and nuanced models of the structure of the problem, because you've been talked through the creation of the thing. So that's much better. This is like a second example, which I'm not sure that I necessarily have time for. I'll do it very quickly. It's the same kind of thing. It's a thing I wish my mathematics teachers would do. They would just be like, oh, we want to find the area under this curve. Why? Do we care about that? Whatever. So first off, label your axes, have some reason to care. Perhaps this is like a vehicle, and this is its speed, and we want to know how far it's traveled, something like that. We want this area. So do something like linear interpolation, right? We know how to do this. The maths is easy. But it sucks. Like, there's this enormous error. So we do something piecewise linear. We divide it up into these, 4 segments. And then, again, the maths, we can do it. But there's still an error. So we make our segments shorter. But, 1, there's still an error. And 2, this is more work. And if we want to reduce this error arbitrarily small, we need to do arbitrarily large amounts of work. So, calculus. I'm not going to do the whole thing. My point is just you can motivate things with this type of story. There's a problem, there's a solution. You don't literally have to alternate so and but, by the way. It's just make sure you never have just an and then. Another type of story you can tell is adversarial fiction. This is not as widely applicable as the other ones in a technical context. But if you are doing information security or security, cryptography, containment, that kind of thing, that's a useful way to do it. So people also need to understand your work. You've got people to follow it. Telling a story helps, but the main way that you get people to really understand your work is to aim low. If you aim at the target, it's smooth. Okay, wrong font, I guess. If you aim at the target, you will hit too high. Aim below the target, and you might hit it. What this means is if you want your work to be understood by researchers, aim at undergraduate level at the highest. If you want PhD students to understand your work, aim at high school. If you want government policymakers to understand your work, aim at sort of 8 to 12. years old. And this is not, but this is different from disrespecting your audience. Respect your audience. Do not assume your audience is stupid. Assume that they're ignorant, right? Don't assume that a government policymaker will know anything technical that you learn after you're 12 years old. But that doesn't mean, like, don't be insulting. Assume you're talking to a smart 12-year-old. But the point of this is that it forces you to lean on as few dependencies as you can get away with. You probably don't need to import the whole of linear algebra to explain your thing. Can you get away with explaining it with less? If you can, you should. Now, a lot of people would then think, hang on, if I explain my thing simply, won't people think that my thing is simple? To this I say, get over yourself. Forget about being respectable, be clear. People will respect you if you do good work. People will know your work is good if they can understand it, right? If a clear understanding of your work would cause people to respect it less, do better work. So you should write how you talk. You should be as informal as you can get away with. People already know how to explain their ideas. The number of times when I read a paper and I don't really understand it, and I talk to the person, and they say, oh, well, the way to think about that is blah, and they introduce some metaphor or something that wasn't in the paper. I used to have, I should have on this slide, stop hitting yourself. The number of people who are quite capable of explaining their idea, and then as soon as they get on stage or they start writing something, they become incredibly formal and they just lose the ability to express anything. Just write how you talk. One way to do this is to make sure you read what you write. Read what you write out loud. Things which are uncomfortable to say out loud are also uncomfortable to read. And making sure that your thing flows nicely is important. And finally, explain your thing to real people. Find a person who's a good proxy of your intended audience, get them in a room with a whiteboard, and explain your thing to them. And make notes, or better yet, record and then listen to it later and make notes. And pay attention to questions people have, misconceptions, when people misunderstand you, how and why, and how can you avoid that next time. And also, anytime you find yourself wanting to write some kind of diagram on the board, that should be a diagram, that should be a figure. And okay, that sounds like a lot of work, maybe, and it is, but on the margin, this will improve your work more than spending that same amount of time trying to do slightly better research, probably. So yeah, just to sum up the key takeaways. Communication is the whole point of research. This is extremely important and should be prioritized. Allocate resources appropriately. Put your stuff out there in a bunch of different formats. Make sure people have reasons to care. Tell a story, an interesting story, and the way that you do that is so and but, and never just then. Aim low in knowledge, but not intelligence. And practice explaining your thing to real people. In general, in research, communication is badly neglected. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. You, I think, have a duty to do better, and it's actually not that hard. You can do a lot better, and you should. You just have to allocate actual time and energy to communication. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Very sorry about the slides. Don't know what happened there. Any questions from the audience? Yes, on the far right.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. I want you to put your story into the context of AI safety and AGI safety, because I have a feeling that many people have very strong prior beliefs about how dangerous AI is, and particularly in Japan, I have difficulty in conveying this type of problem, and so have you ever stumbled upon this kind of thing in AI safety in particular, and any thoughts about that?
I'm not certain that I understand the question. Have I come across
come across that the story of like efficacy of AI safety research to people who don't believe that such research is necessary, or
Yeah, I think that there are sort of competing narratives, right? A lot of people already have a story in their mind of how these things are going to go, and so they're not willing to hear yours because it's contradictory to that. And that is kind of unavoidable, I think. You just want your story to be more compelling. And you know, for different people, there are different things that work there, but fundamentally, you need to tell a story that makes sense, that stands up under close scrutiny. And I guess there is also a thing that doesn't tie in with this, which is poking holes in the story that they have, right? But okay, so one example of a story that could work there is the story of a person changing their mind. If you did believe something different, and you then came to hold the beliefs you have now, what was the process by which that happened? And recounting that story may also walk somebody through the same experience. But that has to be personal. Because if you can't fake that. I mean, you can't really fake anything. People are pretty good at spotting if you're not being honest with them. So yeah, there's limitations to being able to deploy that kind of thing honestly, but if you can, you should, yeah.
Okay,
thank you for your thoughtful comments. Thank you.
Maybe one more from the far left of the room in the yellow jacket.
Sorry, not a question, but more of a public service announcement that about 80% of Rob Miles' videos have Japanese subtitles, so please check them out if you are interested. Thank you.
Nice.
In that case, we have time for one more question, or several public service announcements. Let's go back to the right-hand side of the room.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We, as researchers, we need to focus more on communication. But I think one thing I wonder about is, where do you stop? Like, if you've got a piece of research, you don't know whether it's good or not, you don't know whether people are going to be interested in it or not. And you can sink a lot of time and a lot of effort into pieces of research that may or may not be valuable to the community.
Yeah.
I suppose, do you have a sense of at what point should you, how far should you pursue communication?
So you stop allocating resources to communication when you think that a marginal additional unit of resources would be better allocated to research. This was kind of what I was hinting at before, saying that, like, do you think it's easier to double your research quality or to double your communication? There will come a point where, you hit diminishing returns on everything. And so there will come a point where one edge is ahead. I'm just gesturing at that I think most people are not at that point, and probably not close to that point. But it does happen eventually. A lot of the things that I'm saying about ways to do communication well, I actually had an additional slide for this in the new slides, is that the best communication strategies only really work if your work is good. So for example, be excited and enthusiastic about your work. Because if you don't seem excited by your work, how can you expect anyone else to be? You're the person who understands it best, right? So if you find it hard to be excited about your work, maybe you shouldn't be prioritizing communication. Maybe you should be doing better work. In the same way, if you are if you're explaining things very clearly and concisely and simply, that strategy only works if the thing you're explaining is actually really good, right? If the thing is not that good, it's actually not in your best interest to communicate it clearly, because if people really understand your work, then they might have valid criticisms of it, and that can be very scary. If you just communicate unclearly, you can hide your mediocrity behind a bunch of Greek symbols, and then people won't understand it. They may criticize it, and you can just tell yourself, well, they didn't understand it. And then you never have to improve your ideas. So the communication side of things can help you to do better research, but by making you notice, right? If you're required to use communication techniques that work best when you have good research, that forces you to notice the problems with your research. And this is also not a coincidence. The reason why these communication techniques work well is because they work best with good research, right? People observe, oh, this person is very straightforward and to the point. They're not trying to bamboozle me. Probably their ideas are actually good because they don't have to hide behind things, right? This person seems very enthusiastic about their work. It's hard to fake that. So probably they really are excited about it, which is like a signal that it's actually good. There's a lot of synergy between the two sides of things.
Okay. On that note,
Cool.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you very much. Cool.